And I wanted to talk to you guys today about DM Insights and how I use it in my practice. I wanted to follow up on Dr. Tara Gostovich's webinar, which was fantastic. She was coming from a more boutique practice standpoint and had some amazing numbers and insights that she shared with you guys a few weeks back. So if you haven't seen that webinar, please reach out to Dental Monitoring, get connected so that you can get that information. I'm coming from a spot where we're a lot larger practice. We're over 2 locations, and there's 2 doctors, myself and my father, that work in the practice. So we're trying to see, does DM Insights scale as you move up in practice size? But before we get into that, I wanted to show my family to you guys. It's my beautiful wife, Britton, and then our 3 incredible children. We have Brooklyn, who's my oldest, and bless her heart, she's exactly like me. So we're having to fight through that and learn about that as we go through. And then this is our magic in the middle. This is Olivia, and she's 3 years old. Brooklyn's 5. She is spicy. We call her our sweet and sour kid, Cabbage Patch Kid. But she is big emotions, loves big, and just has the most amazing heart. And then our caboose, little Harrison, he's about 9 months now, and he is just trying to take it all in, especially when the big sisters start running circles around him. But life isn't always this picturesque. You know, we have our crazy moments at home too. Spaghetti night can get kind of wild. And then my wife and I have a saying where when the pigtails come out, the sass is soon to follow. So when it's a piggy tail day, you know that we have to be on our toes. The roller skates are on because the girls are going to give us a run for our money. And, Olivia here, our magic in the middle, just loves all the toys. And sometimes it's the box that the toy came in that's better than the toy itself. And just a little insight into Olivia. She, just likes to dance to the beat of her own drum. I'm not sure if the audio came through, but she was given a big yell as she rode down the driveway. You can see in the still frame there that we have a 4-legged furry friend that hangs out with us. This is Teddy. He's a golden doodle, and he's actually a certified therapy dog. So he comes to the office with me on a daily basis where he gets to interact with patients. And he just loves the interaction, meeting, and hanging out with all the people as they come in and out of the office. When he's not with patients, chances are he can be found in one of our laps. He does think that he is a lap dog, even though he's close to 40 pounds, but that's his favorite spot to be. So with that out of the way, I wanted to kind of go through some learning objectives for today and kind of guide our conversation. I want to help identify the relevant data and areas to focus on because it can get overwhelming when you first jump into insights. And I want to give you a systematic kind of evaluation and interpretation of the data, or at least how I look at it. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, but this is the best way that I've found to kind of digest and make impactful changes to your practice with the data that you're getting. And then developing an action plan. And of course, with our action plan, we want to actually make it across the cliff. We don't want the weight, the ball and chain behind us to run taut and we end up falling into the ravine. We want to clear the cliff and ultimately make it to the top of the summit. So the agenda for today, again, we're going to focus on some areas to identify and friction points that are in your practice. And then we're going to kind of go through an inflection point. How do we interpret the data? Then finally, once we've interpreted the data, what decisions need to be made? And then we'll follow up with a Q&A. To help frame our conversation today, I do want to share that my wife and family just got back from Disney World in Florida. For the first time, we took the kids, and it was magical and amazing and stressful all at the same time. Disney is currently celebrating their 50th year in the park. So there's extra celebrations, extra decorations. The whole park is just bustling with energy. But for myself, it had been 25 years since I'd been to Disney. At that time, Animal Kingdom was just opening, and not all the features were there. There was no Pandora. There was no magic bands that you use for your tickets. There was no app. It was very much a stand in line, kind of wander around. You may get a trifold map of the park when you first get in there to help navigate your way through, but it could be frustrating because you never knew what you were getting into. You may walk up to a ride and there's very little wait, or you may see that it's a 300-minute wait time, and there was no way to really plan your day. Now, of course, there were tips and tricks and magazine articles that were written at the time to help guide you and give you a best practice, but you didn't really know what you were going to get into until you set foot in the park and actually started walking around. So it was very stressful, and Disney was doing the best they could, but that's what the technology was at the time, 25 years ago. And a lot of that can parallel to our clinic and how we interpret the flow of the day. We're taking into account patient experience. What are their wait times in the waiting room? A lot of our clinic management softwares can show, when a patient checks in and how long they waited. We're using that to help guide our scheduling. Of course, we have the angry moms that tend to be the loudest, but also the lowest percentage of our patients. So we're taking that into account as well. We're also looking at the number of appointments on our schedule. We know how we feel at the end of the day, how tired or energized we still are. And we're trying to draw parallels back. Okay, I saw 50 patients today or 100 patients today, big clinics with multiple doctors and maybe 150 or 175 patients that day. And we're trying to find that sweet spot where if I can get this range of patients, I feel really good at the end of the day. But if it's 5 more than that, it's too many. And we also want to enhance the care of our patients. That's what we're trying to do. So we're constantly going into the PMS reporting, looking at how long our treatments are, how efficient our treatments are, the quality of our outcomes, looking at those final photos and final records, and then looking back on the chart review. But with that, there's inherent human risk and error that comes in to the PMS reports, because a lot of times we're relying on humans to input the data for those reports. For instance, there's a mom that calls and it's a pokey wire. They have to be seen right then. So the front desk employee who took the call puts that in, logs it as a pokey wire, puts it in the right appointment. You see the patient and ends up being a broken bracket. And that's why the wire was poking in the first place. Well, that broken bracket's not going to get captured in the PMS reporting because the front desk thought it was a pokey wire, and that's how they inputted it. So you're not capturing accurate data on all of your emergencies and all your inefficiencies when you do that. Now, of course, a blind squirrel does find a nut every once in a while, so there is benefit to these reports, but they could be better. And then, of course, we're looking at internal processes and systems. And then we also want to look at, the quality of the materials, the braces that we're using, the aligners that we're using, the power chains or elastic chains, the rubber bands. We're constantly evaluating those materials. Okay, are they working? Are they holding up like we want? I'm always really nervous when we change adhesives in our practice because it could work out really well, or it could be an absolute nightmare. And we don't tend to find out how well this adhesive is doing until 6 months into the change and all my braces are falling off. So it can be scary to make these changes. So that's why we want to have as much information up front before we make that change. But without that information up front, we're constantly reacting. We never seem to be able to anticipate these problems. They always tend to sneak up on us. And we feel like we're behind the 8 ball all the time. And it can feel like the clinic's just spinning out of control. This is actually my wife's favorite ride at Disney World. I don't understand what joy she gets from it, but this is where her happy spot is, spinning around in the teacups. And of course, my girls followed suit. They loved the adrenaline pump that they got from it. I was happy to hang back with little Harrison and take lots of pictures. But even with the teacup spinning out of control, Disney has always been the happiest place on earth despite the hurdles of long lines and not understanding what you're getting into and having to wait and all those things. Orthodontics is the same way. Despite the hurdles that I just laid out in our clinic, we're still a great profession. We're successful, happy. The patients are taken care of. We all have success stories in our own practices of life-changing treatments that we've given to patients where their life is completely turned around, confidence-wise and self-image-wise, because of the therapies that we provided them. But of course, times change. Over the 25-year gap between my Disney trips, things improved. Some things changed. Other things they did away with completely. Time passes and technology evolves. But hold on, because it's moving really fast nowadays, it seems. Every day there's a new gadget, gizmo, app that comes out, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So I remembered a book that I'd read a few years back on business strategies. And it was based off the time that the Intel CEO had and just the struggles and ways that he helped bring the company through those struggles. And one point that he highlighted in the book was an inflection point. So it's a strategic inflection point. And he said every business has these, no matter the sector, no matter what part of the economy. And as time goes on, the business reaches this point where if they make the right decisions, the business continues to grow. But if they make the poor decisions or the wrong decisions, the business moves into decline. So the way that it's defined, it's an event that results in a significant change in the progress of a company, industry sector, economy, or even geopolitical situations. And it can be considered a turning point after which a dramatic change, could be positive, could be negative, is expected. But the one thing for sure is that change is expected. We've had these with dentistry and orthodontics all along. Aligners, scanners, 3D cone beams. COVID, in fact, was a major inflection point for our industry. And it can be scary. We don't know what's going on, and we don't know which decision is going to be the right decision or the wrong decision, because we all want our business and our practice to be successful. Well, Disney's not immune to that as well. They have undergone several inflection points over the 25 years, and part of their solution was to go digital. And now they have an app experience where you can look up the wait times, you can look up a map of the park, you can even order food, mobile orders where you fill it out on your phone, you say, hey, I'm walking that way, and by the time you get there, the food pops out on a window and there's zero wait. Your park tickets are there, your hotel stays there, everything you need lives in this app, and it helps streamline your experience so that you know how to approach your day and you can plan ahead and anticipate as opposed to react. Now, change isn't a stranger to orthodontics either, like I mentioned before. We can go a little bit further back in time. Tie wires was a game changer for orthodontics. It was an inflection point, and the doctors that adopted it had a step ahead. They were able to treat and realize efficiencies that doctors still using stainless steel and TMA wires weren't able to achieve. Aligners was another inflection point for our industry, a new way to move teeth. Of course, when digital scanners came along, aligners became more popular because we didn't have to do the PVS impressions and wait 5 minutes per arch and then do the wash and do it again. So the patient experience was so much better that it forced the industry forward. And then came digital workflow. So that's kind of where we are now. We're moving into that more and more digital workflow where we don't have the traditional treatment planning tools that we've done in the past. It's mostly on a computer now. And of course, from the business side, we have corporate groups, DSO, OSO companies that have come out and depending on your viewpoint, may have invaded the space or just highlighted and provided an experience and an opportunity in the space. But either way, they're forcing a change in the industry. And then you also have the direct to consumer companies, regardless of how you feel about those. They're impacting the industry one way or another. And then I would put remote monitoring in that as well, and everything that that term covers. It's impacting the industry and forcing it to evolve. So this industry of ours is constantly evolving. And part of that fruit, part of that digitization, there's new companies coming out. And some we've heard of, some we haven't. One company I like to highlight is Gauge, and everybody's pretty familiar with them now. They revolutionized this way that we're able to monitor our practice from the business side. You know, as a new technology at the time that disrupted the industry, and it provided clear and concise data on the health of our business. Again, we were trained as doctors and educated as doctors. We don't necessarily have a business degree to fall back on. So Gauge stepped in and filled that gap and gave us business intelligence. Well, we fast forward and now we have DM insights through dental monitoring. And it is to the clinic side of our practice what Gauge is to the business side of our practice. So it provides us clear clinical data. It highlights our blind spots and removes subjective emotions, feelings, and energy that we use to base our decisions off of, and also allows for improved clinical systems. So I'm going to show you some of my insights straight from my data. Being honest and real with you guys, the data is not perfect. It may shock a lot of you guys, but I wanted to be honest and show you how I'm using my data to improve my practice. So when you first log into the dashboard, you see kind of summary table at the front. So you can see I have just over 1,000 patients on monitoring. And then you can see the split of my practice between teenagers and adults. And so we're 2/3 teenagers, 1/3 adult, roughly. And then my practice is also split pretty closely along those lines between brackets and aligners, with 2/3 being brackets and 1/3 being aligners. So I'm not a huge share of chair aligner practice. I'd still utilize a lot of brackets. As you scroll down the dashboard, then you get into the clinical data part. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And when you first log in, you see just some highlights, but you'll want to click on this see all notifications. But you have to be careful, because when you do get to see everything. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed. You don't want to look at everything at once. We want to try and prioritize and phase and understand which data points impact efficiency and understand why. Because when you click on that, there's going to be over 80 different metrics that you can evaluate. And you'll have the data for the past year on every one of those metrics. And that 80 is just for the bracket side. There's even more on the aligner side. So don't get overwhelmed. Take one bite at a time and then make small incremental changes. So looking at my stats for the last 365 days, I had 464 bracket debonds, averaging about 39 a month, 30 archwire disengagements, 25 a month, and 208 self-ligation gates left open, averaging about 17 a month. If I remember correctly, Dr. G in the previous webinar had 18 bracket debonds all year. I felt like I had 18 this past week. So again, different practices, but we all have our struggles. So what did I do when I was presented with this information? So this is when I first started with Insights. I'm like, okay, this is not where I want to be. What changes can I make? So we all know with emergency appointments, the repairs, they clog the schedule, they decrease profitability, prohibit growth, and the target, if you talk to consultants, is less than 5%. I was way above that margin. So I started to dive deeper. So I looked at actual bracket debonds. And the beauty of DM Insights is it gets you down to the tooth. It's not saying you had total brackets that were lost. It gives you that information too, but it actually gives you the total number per tooth that are broken. And there's no way you could get that information from your PMS reporting, because even if it was put in correctly as a broken bracket appointment, it's logged on a per patient basis. So you had one patient that had a broken bracket, but if that patient had actually 3 broken brackets, it's still only counted as one. whereas DM Insights would count that as 3 broken brackets. So you get a more accurate picture of your bracket failures. So for me, all my 6s, upper and lower, accounted for almost 30% of my brackets that were failing. The lower right 6 specifically was 11% of the total. That's a massive lion's share of the failures for one tooth. So I started questioning, okay, is there something going on with my bonding technique for that tooth? Do a lot of my patients have occlusal interferences? Are we not discluding them enough when we bond that bracket to protect it? So I started digging in further into the data, and this is how the graph looks when I was digging into it. So you can see the top graph shows the distribution per tooth. And I would expect that the arch would look like it does for the upper, where you have less breakage in the front of the mouth, so towards the middle of the graph, and then increased breakage as you get to the posterior, which is what we would expect. But when you look at mine, you see that lower right 6 really jumps out. It's well above the rest of the graph. And then I started looking at the graph below that, and that actually gives us a scan number. So this is the week or the scan where the artificial intelligence detected a broken bracket. And you can see it's pretty even except for week 3. So I started thinking, okay, what's happening at week 3? Because I would have expected it to be week 1 because it's fresh glue. Maybe there was an isolation issue, something that I could fix. But it wasn't week 1, it was week 3. And as I thought more about it, I realized, okay, week 1, the patient is probably still sore, and my diet instructions are fresh on their mind. So they're not eating like they normally do, and they're avoiding the foods that they're supposed to. Week 2, they start to feel a little bit better. And then sometime between week 2 and 3, they forget they have braces on. And they start going back to their old habits. And then when they do that 3rd week scan at the end of the week, boom, we get a breakage appointment. So once I had that information, I was able to go into our protocols and send an automated message to the patient between week 2 and 3 saying, hey, friendly reminder, you have braces on. These are the foods that you need to avoid. I hope you're feeling a lot better. We're here for you if you need us. To kind of reiterate those diet instructions. And again, it happens automatically in the background. So myself or a team member doesn't have to actively send that message. Still hanging in there with me, guys? So that's how I approached bracket failures. And I'll circle back to that later on in the presentation. The next category that I looked at was archwire disengagements. So again, my 6s accounted for close to 60%, which I would expect because I don't always bond or band the 7 bracket or 7 tooth at my full bandings or full starts. So a lot of times the 6 is the terminal tooth that has appliances in it. So it would make sense that the majority of the disengagements would happen on that tooth. What was interesting is my lower right 6, again, noticing a theme, was 21% of the total. The lower left 6 was equally amount, 21% of the total. So combined, the lower 2 molars were essentially that category. So my upper 6s aren't really disengaging. So why are the lower 6s disengaging more than the upper? Are we cutting the arch wires too short? Is that the reason why the arch wires are disengaging? The brackets that I use do have self-ligation doors on the 6s. So the thought was, okay, are we leaving that door open? Are we not getting that full closure, that full click, where as the patient eats or messes with them, that door's opening up, causing the disengagement? And again, the AI is very specific. So you can see these are 2 different, same patient, 2 different times, but different doors are left open. You can see the one on the left side of your screen is obvious. But the one on the right side of the screen, I'm not sure I would have picked that up in person. That's how specific the AI is and how accurately it can detect a door being left open. So my next step in trying to figure out the arch wire issue was, let me look at the doors, because I know even if it is barely cracked open, the AI will tell me, hey, that counts, you left that door open. Let's look at that. So when I hit my largest offenders on the doors, my threes, upper and lower, accounted for 23%. The lower threes in particular were 14%, which makes sense. That's where the arch wire starts to turn, especially if we get into rectangular arch wires. That can be a tougher wire to engage, especially for moving into it a little prematurely. My next largest offender were the fours, with the lower fours accounting for 13% of the total. And then here we are at the sixes. These were way down the list, and all of the sixes accounted for 9%. So I deduced that, okay, the arch wire is not disengaging because we're leaving the door open. So that leaves us with another solution. We ultimately decided, hey, on our light nine-tie wires, the round nine-tie wires, let's leave them a little bit long and do a turn back or a cinch back behind the six to help prevent them from disengaging. So that was kind of our action plan with that metric. While I was looking at the gates of the doors, I noticed, man, I'm leaving a lot of doors open at week one. So this is between initial bonding and 7 days later when they do their first scan. That's when the AI is detecting that my doors are being left open. I thought I was better than that, guys. Like, for sure, I was getting the doors closed on day one, right? So we had a team meeting. We actually used this to revamp our training and help get our clinic, myself and the assistants, kind of raise our game, so to speak, so that, we had to address this, because even though it wasn't causing a problem with our arch wire disengagement metric, it was still an inefficiency in our clinic. Anybody asleep yet? This is Lil Harrison. This is how he spent most of the time at Disney World, in the kangaroo pouch, just loving life. It was kind of fun because he would fall asleep outside of a ride, and then we'd all get in line together and he'd stay in the pouch. And then he'd tend to wake up halfway through the ride and have no idea how he got there. So a little bit startled and a little bit bewildered, but he was a champ during our time there. So we kind of reviewed my numbers over the last year. Let's see how that change has impacted our clinic. So let's look at the last 30 days. So again, bracket failures, that number has more normalized. Again, you can see the lower right six is not a huge discrepancy. Now, the upper right six I'll have to look at next. So it's an ever-evolving process. But with the lower right six, some of the changes that we made were bracket position. My father and I decided we're going to try to bond it maybe 1/4 to 1/2 millimeter more gingival. And then we also changed our etch protocol. So before, when we would do a full star or full banding, we would have the cheek retractors in and we would etch the left and the right side all at once, and then work our way left to right, putting the brackets on. So we decided to slow it down a little bit and etch just one side, put the brackets on, and then etch the second side and put the brackets on there, just to try and eliminate any isolation issues. But the biggest thing I'm proud of is the open clips. Remember, we had the team meeting, we changed our training protocol, and then all of a sudden we had 0 open gates in the last 30 days. So that's what I'm really excited about. And big celebration with the team. So everybody was happy to see that metric improve. So I want to talk to you guys now on the action plan. Y'all saw how I kind of worked through the data, and that was just 3 of the over 80 metrics that you can look at. So there's a lot that you can choose to dive into, but again, I would encourage you to take it slow, do small bites, and pick 2, 3, maybe 4 metrics at a time and really focus and understand those before you move on to the next. So again, we want to identify the changes that we want to make, the clinic blind spots, the patient experience. We want to create an immersive care, but also, going back to Gage and the business side, we want to be mindful of those KPIs so that we can run more efficiently. So we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. We want an incredible patient experience where they're just feel taken care of. They're amazed and impressed with the quality of care that they're receiving, but also we're running efficiently from the business side as well. So with that action plan, it's time to act. Change is on the way and it's scary. Ghosts from our past, old habits, they tend to die hard. They want to go with us into the future. But I want to encourage you guys to make the changes, look at your data, and leave those ghosts in the past. And let's jump into the future. Remember, Disney has always been the most magical place and the happiest place on earth. Orthodontics is the same way. It's always been the happiest profession. It's always been magical. It's just changing with the times. Orthodontics is a place where you get to meet your heroes and then learn from the legends. Some of those heroes, some of those legends are going to actually be at the summit in a couple weeks with dental monitoring. So I encourage you guys, if you're not coming, to reach out to your dental monitoring rep and get the information. I'm going to be there learning from the heroes and legends alongside with you. So I hope to see you there. And then remember, as we're climbing to the summit, we may even see a Yeti along the way. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. And if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the Q&A or in the chat. So I'll go ahead and put this, I'm going to read this to you, Dr. Berry. You're awesome. Thank you for helping us build this. Over the course of piloting and using insights, how are you seeing the data impact actual length of treatment? Secondly, have you started using insights to test and compare other products? This is from David Fitterling.
Of course. So I haven't used it to test other products yet, or I should back up. I started a pilot in my office a couple weeks ago, testing some different products with insights. So hopefully I'll have that data for you guys once it starts to roll in, but I don't have conclusive data to present yet. And as far as treatment times, the changes that we're making in the clinic have really impacted our treatment time. So we're looking at comparing treatment time before insights and then after insights. We've been able to shave about 2 to 3 appointments off of our fixed appliance or bracket cases. And we've been able to shave about 1 to 2 appointments off of our aligner cases. So we're seeing the patient less in office, but we're still giving them this incredible, amazing experience. One thing to consider is with the emergencies, it may only be a 20-minute or even a 10-minute appointment for us, but for that family, it may be a 2 to 3 hour endeavor because a parent has to take off work, drive to the school, check the kid out of school, then drive to your office. Let's say they wait 10 minutes in the waiting room, 10 minutes in the chair, and then the parent has to do that all again, back to school, drop the kid off, back to work. So by the time they do that round trip, it's 3 hours for what we're thinking is a 10, 20-minute appointment. So the more that we can eliminate that, it really helps the families out because they're at capacity. They're running to sports and school and jobs and everything. So they really appreciate the care that we're taking where we can still provide the same standard of care that we had in the past without them having to be in person as often.
Okay, so we have questions coming in. Heather Elliott said, thanks for all of the information. Do you know if there are capabilities to track treatment times? Or how do you track your treatment times?
So right now we're tracking treatment times in our PMS. So we have different treatment methods that are listed with dental monitoring along with our appliances. So we may have a regular bracket case that was treated before dental monitoring. And then we have brackets with dental monitoring, aligners with dental monitoring, all the different combinations of things. So we're using that to track our treatment totals or treatment links. My understanding is that dental monitoring is working on incorporating a treatment time into the insights. So hopefully we'll see that in the future. But right now I'm relying on our PMS reporting, and then I'm just trying to be a super detailed in the treatment method so that I can flesh out those differences.
Thank you. Dr. Warren Phillips asked, can you talk about your experience with clear aligners and insights?
Sure. So it's going back to actually David's question with that. One thing that we've been able to see as we trial different aligner companies and different plastics is we're able to track the unseats with DM Insights. So if you set it up right from the beginning where you're able to delineate between the patients that are using Invisalign aligners versus Spark aligners versus ULab aligners, whatever ones that you're experimenting with, you can actually track how well the patient's teeth are tracking with the different aligner systems. So you can track unseats based on Invisalign patients versus Spark patients versus ULab patients. And again, we're down to the tooth. So you can track the upper left tooth, how many unseats per aligner company. So it's incredibly detailed. And that is one way that I'm using insights as well on the aligner side, is trying to figure out in my hands, in the way that I treat aligner cases, which plastic tends to work the best.
Thank you. Okay. You mentioned that you practice with your father. How were you able to work through this transition together, considering the generational differences?
Great question. And I'm incredibly lucky in that. My dad is not only an amazing orthodontist, but he's always been at the forefront of technology. He was one of the first orthodontists in our county or any of the surrounding counties to have an intraoral scanner. So he's always wanted and kind of pushed that envelope with the technology. Now, with the generational differences, he doesn't know as much about the new technologies that are coming out. So he kind of relies on me to educate him on, is this going to work? Is there a benefit there? How do we implement that into our practice? But just by his nature, he's always been open to new technologies. So I'm fortunate where I haven't had to kind of cross that bridge or fight that battle with my dad as far as, wanting to make changes to the clinic. And our conversation, it's, we're business partners, and it's, how's this going to benefit our patients? How's this going to benefit our clinic? Can we afford to adopt this new technology? So we treat each other as equals in that conversation, and almost pitch it to each other as, okay, these are the benefits, these are the pitfalls, these are the risks that we see, and come to a consensus together.
Awesome. Okay, one more question. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put it in the question and answer section, and we'll be able to talk to Dr. Berry. Were you faced with any team members perceiving this granular detail as personal criticism, or how did you help them see it otherwise?
Great question. And that's all in the delivery. One thing that we didn't do is we didn't call out specific assistants. We didn't say, Susie's amazing and she never leaves a door open, whereas Morgan, on the other hand, is leaving half of her doors open. So we didn't, call out individuals. It was more of a group conversation. I'm like, hey, this number of patients are leaving with incomplete treatment. The doors are being left open, or they're having to come back because the wire is poking them because it wasn't long enough, or we didn't do the turn back. And I pitched it to them more like, okay, we can see the patient once when they're supposed to, or we can see the patient that time plus 1 or 2, 3 additional times when they're not supposed to. One thing with at least my assistants, they like to get out on time. They like to have a full lunch. So when they realized that their errors or their lack of training or the overlooking of those details were impacting their day and how busy they were and how many patients they were being asked to see, they were on board for making those changes, because they're like, hey, we have to see him once. Let's only see him once. We don't want to have him boomerang back and we're seeing him multiple times. Didn't have to.
Awesome. Okay, hold on. I have one more. When you examined dental monitoring as a potential fit for your practice, how did you calculate ROI with braces specifically, or how do you calculate it now?
Sure. So the same way I calculated it then is how I calculate it now and how I look at it. And my whole kind of impetus from the business side for getting with dental monitoring or involving them in our practice was to try and save appointment time, to be more efficient in my treatment and learn more about my mechanics. So with my ROI calculation, if I could save one appointment time, so if I could just shave one appointment from treatment, it would cover the cost of implementing dental monitoring for that patient. And that was based off of the cost of the hardware, the scan box, as well as 24 months of monitoring. If I could save 2 appointments, then I was going to be to the positive. So with us saving 3 appointments right now with brackets and 1 to 2 appointments with aligners, we're meeting or exceeding that ROI. And that's why we've continued to further involve dental monitoring in our system, clinic systems and processes, because we're seeing this return on our investment in the treatment quality and the treatment efficiency with our patients.
Awesome. Okay, one more question that has come in, not specific to DM Insights, but how has the use of monitoring changed how you schedule your patients for future visits?
Great question. So we've had to change a lot of that over the last 6 months or so. Up until last August, we actually had a 3rd doctor with us, and he was working out amazing. He's an amazing orthodontist, but he decided that he would be better to move closer to family. He was originally from the West Coast, so he did move back closer to family. So in that void, we had to find a way to see patients that were being seen by 3 doctors, are now being seen by 2 doctors. And with that, we jumped into Insights and dental monitoring. I'm like, okay, we're looking at the NiTi wires in particular. So the first half of treatment with our bracket patients, and we're like, when are we seeing these wires go passive versus what are we seeing the patient at right now? So with the 3rd doctor, we were seeing patients pretty much every 8 weeks regardless. But we were seeing that the NiTi wires really weren't going passive to between 10 and almost 14 weeks in some cases. So we started stretching out our appointment intervals for the first half of treatment, and then relying on dental monitoring. So if they do go passive sooner, we're able to call the patient and bring them in, but we're not rushing through NiTi wires that way. So it's a pseudo dynamic schedule in a sense, where we're waiting for their teeth to go passive, or when we think their teeth are going to kind of peter out and stop moving with that specific wire before we bring them back. So stretching out those appointments, along with making some changes on the aligner side, where we're not seeing them for aligner checks anymore, really helped streamline our schedule so that we could see the same amount of patients that 3 doctors were seeing now with 2 doctors without having to add additional work days or work hours.
Awesome. That's working out great for you. So I have a couple more questions, but I do want to circle back to where, you said on average, you're saving 3 appointments for your braces patients. Mm-hmm. And is it 2 appointments for your aligner patients?
Yes.
And okay. So I want you to kind of explain on your aligner patients, are you already giving them a big amount of time in between? And so then you're actually seeing them every week through dental monitoring. Is that kind of what's happening?
It's twofold with the aligner patients. With aligners, it's actually a bigger decrease in appointments than 1 to 2. I just don't have the measured data because before we started DM at all, we were seeing aligner patients every 8 weeks because that's when we were seeing our bracket patients. So we would dispense 8 trays, see them back in 8 weeks, and move through the group that way. And we had a lot of aligner check appointments. With dental monitoring coming in, we said, okay, we don't need to see them every 8 weeks to monitor their tracking and their progress. We can let the artificial intelligence do that and just alert us to when there's a problem. So at that point, we started stretching it out, and we do somewhere 20 to 24 trays at a time. So still not just giving them everything, but a significant increase from what we were doing before dental monitoring. Then as dental monitoring has constantly evolved and created a better product, Insights comes out. And then around that same time, we made the change. Okay, the AI is working. We don't even need to give them, 24 trays and do a spot check. We can give them the entire group and let them run the course. And then if we need to intervene in the middle, the dashboard will let us know. So that Insights metric of shaving 1 to 2 from aligner patients is really reflective of going from 20 trays at a time to the entire group at a time. But if you think back to before dental monitoring at all, when we were seeing a patient every 8 weeks, that's a massive improvement from those days.
Right. Okay. A few more questions. We have just about 10 more minutes. So this is going to be a 2-part. How do your patients perceive dental monitoring? And can you share any of their reaction or feedback to the treatment management that you use in monitoring?
Oh, they've been blown away by it. The biggest reaction come from families that are already a part of our practice. So they may have had an older child come through before we had implemented dental monitoring, and now a younger sibling is coming through. Mm-hmm. And most of the questions that they have during those consults is not, how do the braces work or does it hurt? Because they're used to it. They're veterans at that point. They've already put one child through treatment. The most common question I get is, has anything changed since my older son came through? And we're like, well, yeah, actually it has. A lot of things have changed. And that's when we talk about dental monitoring. And most of the time having that experience from a few years back with their older child, they're like, wait, so, I can text you now through the app versus having to call, or you can see when there's a broken bracket instead of me getting the call in the middle of the workday, like you can already have it handled. So they've seen the friction points in our clinic from before dental monitoring. And then when we're speaking and solving those, they're just blown away by the advantage that it poses, for their child's treatment.
Okay, perfect. And would you say this has elevated their perception of the service that you offer?
I think so. And, they actually feel better taken care of and better communicated with because they have an idea of what's going on in their child's mouth. Now, the patients that are going through treatment themselves, they appreciate it from not having to take off work as much for their own appointments. But my moms in particular, especially on the backside of COVID, it used to be before COVID, mom and dad came with the kid back to the clinic for the appointment every time. So they were getting the progress updates from us at each visit with how things were going. COVID happened and they didn't come back as frequently. So they may only come back once a year in the middle of treatment, just like, hey, I'm here. Is there anything I need to know about my son or daughter's care? But now with dental monitoring, they're getting weekly updates from us on how everything's progressing, how they're brushing their teeth, how the teeth are moving. They can see the teeth change and move into place on a weekly check. So they're loving just the increased communication, and they actually feel better taken care of. They feel more in the know about what's going on in their child's treatment than they did before.
Okay. One more question. As a follow-up to your answer about your aligner appointments, do I understand that now you give all the aligners up front and then leave it completely open-ended for any return visits based entirely on the AI? Do you have any more formal touch points along the way?
So we'll give them all the aligners. You're correct there. Except if there's on the off chance that we have to add an attachment or remove an attachment in the middle. Of course, we'll bring them back in the office for that appointment. The same with interproximal reduction. So if we have any of those midway points where we have to see them in person, we'll give them the aligners up to that point, see them for that visit, and then give them the rest of the aligners. But assuming we don't have to see them in the middle, we will give them the entire group of aligners. Now, we do still run our PMS reports, so I don't like having an open-ended appointment where like they leave without an appointment. So we do book an appointment, and the verbiage that I typically do with the patients like, hey, all right, I'm giving you 48 trays. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing 48, 45, 50 weeks from now. So I don't expect you to either, but let's just book an appointment as a placeholder on our schedule. And then when we get closer to time, we see how you're progressing. If you're ahead of schedule, we'll move that appointment up to a day that's convenient for you. If you're behind schedule, we can push it back. So I just phrase it like, hey, let's get a placeholder on the books so that nobody falls through the cracks. And then closer to time, we revisit that once we see how they've tracked through that aligner group.
Yeah. And, you know, as we're sitting here talking about this, it just reminds me you can use the time frame as well to trigger your DMC to take a look at the patient just to make sure everything's going as planned to see if they did need to come in.
Right. Those are the safeguards that we have built into the protocol as kind of the spot checks that the question asker was alluding to. So we do have those safeguards absolutely where we kind of do a check-in, but the patient doesn't know those are happening. So that's all behind the scenes. We're just doing the spot checks and yep, things are looking good. We're on track. Carry on.
Is this where you may use the adaptive scan interval, or are you using
Yes.
that yet? Okay.
We are using the adaptive scan interval. So it's really nice because the patients love when we give them 40 trays and we're like, it may be 40 weeks, but it actually may be faster if you do a really good job. So they're like, it kind of cuts down on the discouragement because especially if it's a refinement or a second refinement and they're like, man, I thought I was going to be done, but here's another 20 trays. And then you can say, hey, you know, it may not be 20 weeks though. If you do really well, your teeth are moving fast, we'll shorten those intervals and you'll be changing every 5 days instead of 7 days. So it kind of revitalizes that conversation and re-engages the patient to finish treatment strong. And that's another reason why we booked that appointment as a placeholder, because we don't know how the patient's going to do. It's not going to be a guarantee that if we give them 40 trays, we're going to need to see them back in 40 weeks because of that adaptive feature.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. Well, we're pretty much out of time. Dr. Berry, I want to thank you very much for your expertise on DM Insights and all of the knowledge that you've given all of our attendees this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you guys.